Be slow now.
Hey everybody, and this is for Bert and Cora especially. They're in China right now, the country of China, but it's for anybody else who wants in, and it's from The Fields of Home by Ralph Moody, and it takes place here in Maine. Chapter 6, I Currycomb the Yellow Colt. Millie, you remember the end of the last chapter? Let's see. Millie called up in the morning and said, "Get up. What be you, calculating on sleeping the whole blessed day?" It was just about as light as it had been when I went to bed. Chapter 6. Millie had a lamp. Hey, my grandson Jax is ready on the arm of the chair with me. Millie had a lamp lighted and was building a fire in the cook stove when I came down to the kitchen. I said good morning to her when I came in from the front stairway, but she only grumbled something about hoping she'd find the fires of hell built with Getzel birch when she got there. I didn't know what Getzel birch was, but as I washed my face and hands at the pump sink in the back pantry, I could see she was having a hard time getting the fire started. Twice she jerked the stove lid off, threw kerosene from a tin dipper, and slammed the lid back as the flames shot up. Both times, red glowed from the front of the stove for half a minute, then died down, and billows of smoke poured out from every crack. The wood I'd sawed the afternoon before had been hard maple, but it had been dry. I knew it would make a good fire. I didn't say anything to Millie, but went out and split an armful of it into kindling, picked up a couple pine knots, and took it into the kitchen. Smoke was still pouring from the stove, and Millie was jawing away to herself about it. She didn't pay any attention to me until I'd put the wood in the wood box, was taking the milk bucket down from the pantry shelf. Then she said, "Leave be. Thomas don't want the milking done before 6 o'clock. I'll take care of that. You fix the swill to the sow with a new litter, and take heed you don't top on none of them little pigs." I took the swill bucket from under the sink. It was full almost to the brim with dishwater. I was careful not to slop a drop of it until I was outside the summer kitchen. When I opened the barn doors, the bay mare whinnied for her breakfast, but the old buskin snaked his head out over the half door and snapped at me as I passed his stall. His teeth didn't miss my shoulder by more than half an inch. I had trouble not to dodge away from him, but I didn't. By the time I got to the sow's pen, I had my mind made up about the way I was going to handle him. It was only 5:15. If Grandfather didn't want the milking done before 6, I'd have plenty of time. I worked just as fast as I could while I lugged water to the hogs in the barn cellar, measured them out a quart of corn apiece, cleaned the sty up, and climbed the mow to pitch down hay for the horses. Then I cleaned the mare's stall, bedded it with loose chaff from the barn floor, and fed her, but I didn't go near the buckskin. The night before, Millie had told me to give the horses bran, but that morning I gave the bay mare whole corn. I wanted to be sure the buckskin would hear her chewing it. I currycombed and brushed her while she ate, and listened to him stamping, snorting, and raking his teeth across the timbers of his stall. When the mare was almost finished with the corn, and when the old buckskin was nearly frantic, I slipped out of her stall with the currycomb in my hand, took his bridle down from its spike, and went toward his stall door. His head came shooting out over the half door. It looked like a picture of a Chinese dragon. I swung the bridle in front of my face, just the way Grandfather had, but with the other hand, I slipped the currycomb up in front of the binder. Buckskin bit it so hard that he turned down a whole row of the sharp teeth, then snorted and snapped 3 times more in quick succession. I didn't swing the currycomb at him, but each time I was careful to see that it was where he'd bump his lips or teeth against it. After the third bump, he whirled, crowded his head into the far corner of the stall, and stood dancing. There's a picture of Ralph in the box stall with the yellow colt, which is the old buckskin horse. You can, if you look closely, you can see, let's see, the currycomb in Ralph's other hand. See it, Jax? Okay. And no, down, right. that thing right there. That thing right there, Jax. Okay. Okay. Okay, let's see now. Where were we? Oh boy, stood there. I expected him to act just the way he had with grandfather. I was inside the stall door by the time he had his head in the corner. Then I was lucky. With grandfather, he'd gone into the corner with his head high and his back straight. With me, he went with his head low and his back humped. When I was only 8 years old, father had taught me to look out for flying heels when a horse got into that position. And he taught me that the closer I was to them when they flew, the less I'd get hurt. Without ever stopping to figure it out, I jumped to the side of the buskin's rump, swung the currycomb up hard for my knee. It caught him on the near hock as his leg flew past my hip, and it caught him hard. He snorted, swung his rump toward me, and kicked again. This time, I didn't try to hide the currycomb, but smashed it hard against his hock as the legs came up. If I'd misguessed him, and he was really a bad horse, I could be in plenty of trouble, and I knew it. I had to keep telling myself so as I crowded in against him with the currycomb, ready to swing. If he ever found out he could scare me, I'd never be able to handle him, and I knew he had his mind made up to find out. His head swung toward me, with his nostrils open to the size of coffee cups, his ears back, and white showing around his eyes. Then he began to crowd. The solid wall was only 2 feet from my back. If I tried to dodge out, his heels would certainly catch me before I could get to the door. And I could only use the currycomb if I was in close. If I went toward his head, no currycomb could stop him from tearing me to pieces with his teeth. There was only one thing I could do. I had to scare him before he knew he'd scared me. If it had taken me a tenth as long to think it as to tell it, I might have been killed, but it didn't. I stayed tight against his rump, and the second he began crowding me toward the wall, I started beating a tattoo on his belly with the sharp teeth of the currycomb. His back hunched against the bite of the comb. Every muscle in his body was pulled as tight as a fiddle string, and he kept crowding until I could see the wall just behind my shoulder. Then, with a half snort, half groan, the wind went out of him, just as it does with a toy balloon that had a hole poked in it. He didn't dance, but moved over against the far wall and stood sulking and watching me out of the corner of his eye. I felt a little trembly all over as I moved up to the buskin's head. He flung it high, with his nose poked nearly to the ceiling. I could have jumped and made a grab for his under lip, but if I had, he might have bitten my hand. Instead, I swung the currycomb up where he could get a good look at it. His muzzle came part way down. As soon as I'd slipped a thumb in behind his front teeth, he brought his head to the rest of the way down and let me put the bridle on. After I'd buckled the cheek strap, I scratched his forehead with my fingers, looked back along his body. A nerve twitched once or twice in his shoulder, but he wasn't shivering the way he had with grandfather. The way he had after grandfather hit him with the bridle. I soft-talked him a little, kept on scratching his forehead until his ears came up. Then he went for the rest of the harness and put it on. The old horse never moved an inch till the last buckle was fastened. After I'd led him around the stall a few times, I unharnessed him and fed him. Though I knew a horse got more good from his grain if he'd eaten his hay first, I bought the bran as soon as I had the harness hung up, then curried and brushed him as he ate. What, Jax?
The next time we see a picture, can I hold the book up and show him the picture?
Sure, yes. He winced a little when I brushed over the spot on his belly where I had tattooed him with the currycomb, but his ears stayed up, and he didn't lift a foot. I thought it might be getting close to 6 o'clock, so I took the currycomb to the carriage house, straightened the bent teeth, put it back in the barn, and went to the house. Grandfather was nowhere in sight, but Millie was slicing boiled potatoes into an iron frying pan on the stove. The kitchen was clear of smoke, and red glow was coming from the open front of the stove. I took the milk bucket down from the pantry shelf and asked, "Is it time to milk yet?" Instead of answering, Millie turned toward me and looked straight into my eyes with her mouth clamped together tight. "What was you up to with the yellow coat?" she asked. "He doesn't like currycombing," was all I said. She didn't look away from my eyes. She didn't change the expression on her face. Better stay away from him, she said. He devilish near killed a couple of hired hands that tried to get smart with him. Thomas is the only one can handle him. I kept looking right at her and said, I'm not going to get smart with him, and he's not going to get smart with me. How much milk do you want me to bring to the house? A quart's enough. That maple fits in, burns pretty good. Breakfast will be ready when you're done milking. Her voice wasn't soft, but there wasn't any crabbiness in it. When I went back into the barn, the yellow colt shot his head out over the half door. His ears were pinned back. He snorted when he saw who it was, and he snapped. It was just to let off steam. His teeth whacked together like trap springs, but his muzzle only jerked a few inches in my direction. So even though I wasn't afraid of him, I went right up close, but I had the milk bucket all ready to swing if I needed it. I didn't. He drew his head back in, picked up a mouthful of hay as if there had been no one within a mile. With all Millie's having told me the night before that the Holstein heifer would kick the daylights out of me, she didn't raise a foot when I milked her. And if she did, had a sore teat, I didn't find it. As soon as the milk began singing in the bottom of the bucket, 3 cats showed up. From somewhere. And old Bess came into the tie-up and sat watching me. I aimed a stream of milk at her head, the way I used to do with our dog in Colorado. But she didn't know about opening her mouth to catch it. She just sat there, wagging her tail, licking the milk off her lips with her tongue. When I'd stripped the last drops, I found an old pan, filled it with warm milk for her and the cats. Though I hadn't seen it, I knew the Holstein had a calf in the sheep barn. I'd heard it bawl, and she had stood at the doorway bellowing when we brought the cows in the night before. Millie had taken the calf's supper down to it while I had been watering the hogs in the barn cellar. As soon as I'd fed Bess and the cats, I took the rest of the milk and started to the sheep barn. I was just to the doorway when Grandfather hollered from behind me, "Stay out of there! Mind what you're doing!" When I looked around, he was coming across the barnyard toward me as fast as he could walk. "Who told you to feed that calf?" he asked me as he got closer. "Nobody," I said. "But I heard Millie come down and feed it last night. This morning she told me she only wanted a quart of milk at the house." "Didn't she tell you to mind the spider web?" he asked. "No, sir." "Rattle-brained girl," he snapped out, pushed between me and the doorway. Its frame was made of heavy oak logs. The open door sagged on thick rawhide hinges. Grandfather put a hand against each of the upright logs, peeked into the darkness of the old barn. His voice was only a whisper when he said, "Back at Ralphie. The all-fired great spider web across the top half of the inside doorway. Been there nigh under 3 weeks. The old spider will be hatching out her brood pretty quick now. You left the scoots down lower going in. I was scared you was going to blunder into it and smash it all to smithereens." The sheep barn was dug back into the hillside. Whose is that, Rox? Is Jack? Okay. The roof was of poles and hay with earth over them. The floor was solid packed clay that was as hard as stone. As we ducked under the spider web, my eyes became used to the dimness. I could see a spotted calf, 3 or 4 weeks old, penned in one corner of the old barn. A chipped white porcelain bucket was nailed inside the fencing of the pen. The calf was butting it with his head. So we wouldn't slop the milk. I climbed the fence, straddled his neck, and poured all but a quart of it into the chipped bucket. Then I slipped 2 fingers into his mouth for teats and poked his nose into the warm milk. I'd almost forgotten about Grandfather's being there till he asked, "Who learned you how to do that?" "Father, I guess. It seems as if I've always known it." "Well, it's more than I thought you knowed, Ralphie. You've done it like a real farmer." "I am a real farmer," I told him. "I just don't know much about mowing with a hand scythe." "Huh! Don't know nothing about bees or dressing or hay land neither. Strawberries and tomatoes. Who ever heard of a farmer that couldn't swing a snath and scythe? Only fit way to mow a field, except that a man can't find hired hands with gumption enough to do an honest day's work for $1. You've seen how that tunnel mowing machine hogs down the grass, leaves half of it laying in the field. I wonder if it was fixed up in good shape." "Don't tell me!" Grandfather shuddered so loud that the calf let go of my fingers. "Ain't a machine made that will do any job as good as a man could do it by hand if he's got a spark of gumption in him. Wasting. Lazy, shiftless, good-for-nothing farmers nowadays. run into debt for a parcel of fancy machines that ain't worth a tinker, and go broke before they ever get 'em paid for. Father always said that good machinery would pay for itself 10 times over. Father said, what in time and tarnation did Charlie know about farming anyways? Mill hand, wasn't he, when Mary wedded him? My father took up this farm from the wilderness, cut the timber, pulled the stumps, set up stone walls, and cleared the fields. He did nothing except in his own 2 hands, a homemade plow and a yoke of oxen. Horses. Ain't a horse a living can hold a candle to a Durham ox. Why, I recollect, just at that moment Millie called to us, "Victuals is ready." After breakfast, I harnessed the horses while Grandfather was doing something down at the beehives. I hoped he'd stay there till I had time to tighten the nuts on the mowing machine and give it a good oiling, but he didn't. He came to the carriage house doorway when I was hunting through the litter on the workbench. "What in thunderation you dawdling round there for when there's haying to be done?" he shouted. "I was just looking for some wrenches and an oil can," I told him. "That mowing machine sounds as if it's in pretty bad shape." "Ain't nothing matter with it that ain't the matter with all the pesky things," Grandfather snapped. "Now come take care of old Nell while I hits up the yellow colt." As we led the horses outside, I read that wrong, guys. As we led the horses over to the machine, I told myself I'd keep my mouth shut even if I could see the whole shebang was going to explode with the first turn of the wheel. I didn't do it, though. The bolt on the keeper of the end of the pitman rod was so loose, Sicklehead had a half-inch play. I'd heard it hammering the day before, and knew that if it wasn't tightened, it would break the ball joint off. The yellow colt was prancing, bobbing his head, and kicking as Grandfather dodged in and out, trying to fasten his traces. As soon as I had old Nell hitched, I picked up a sharp stone, began tapping the keeper nut tighter. "What in time be you playing with now?" Grandfather shouted at me. "I'm not playing," I said. "I'm just trying to tighten this bolt enough that Sicklehead won't break." Leave be, I tell you. First thing you know, you'll have it busted to smithereens. Hold the yellow colt while I gather up the reins and get along. Time flies." Time wasn't all that flew. Grandfather had just yelled, "Get up! And the yellow colt had taken 2 jackrabbit jumps when the wet grass clogged the cutter bar. Loose pitman keeper jerked the head off the sickle. "Worthless, useless, meddlesome, big-headed boy," Grandfather howled. "Now look what you done. Busted it all to smithereens. What in time and tarnation ails you?" I opened my mouth to yell back, but bit my teeth together and started for the tree where I'd been mowing. "Gory sakes alive, Ralphie," Grandfather called after me. "Didn't calculate to scold you. Tunnel thing keeps busting up all the time and likes to drive me to distraction. Guess I and you better fetch it into the carriage house and tinker it up a mite." The tinkering took us all the rest of the forenoon. Grandfather blew off at me a dozen times for wanting to be too fussy, but he let me put in new knife sections to replace the broken ones, turned the grindstone while he half sharpened the rest of them, then put a new head on the sickle, and tightened most of the bearings. As soon as we'd eaten dinner, he went down to the beehives and seemed to have forgotten all about haying. I sawed wood 10 or 15 minutes while I was waiting for him, then bridled the horses, hitched them to the mowing machine, and drove to the orchard. It was the middle of the afternoon before I saw Grandfather again. By that time I'd made a dozen rounds of the orchard. The old machine had worked pretty well. I had a little trouble with the yellow colt at first, but it hadn't amounted to much. He'd dance and prance around till he found out I wasn't paying any attention to him. Then he balked. Only lasted a minute or two. After I'd wired his ears together good and tight with a piece of soft wire, he'd stood sliding round and bobbing his head. Gave him just time enough to forget he was balking, and picked up the lines, clucked to him, and he walked on, bobbing his head and snoring a little. Grandfather didn't come near us when he came into the field. He took the scythe I'd been using from a limb of the apple tree, looked at the blade, and went to the carriage house. It was nearly an hour before he came back. Then he went to mowing under the trees as though he were all alone in the orchard. The sun was dipping down behind the tops of the pines on the ridge when he called to me. "Take the horses in and fetch the cows. Victuals will be ready before long." Grandfather went to sleep at the supper table again that night, and Millie let me do the chores by myself. And that's the end of chapter 6. Next chapter is entitled Uncle Levi. It's the end of chapter 6.
Bye,
See you later,
guys.
everybody.
I'll see you later. That's also for you, Mommy.